The clash of steel rang through the narrow mountain pass as Georgian cavalry smashed into the Seljuk vanguard. Arrows darkened the sky like a swarm of deadly locusts. Horses screamed, men fell, blood soaked the frozen earth beneath Mount Didgori. King David IV watched from the heights as his trap began to close. Below him, a coalition army 10 times his size pushed deeper into the valley, completely unaware they were marching straight into annihilation. The date was August 12th, 1121, and what was about to unfold would be remembered as the Miraculous Victory. If you want to see how this impossibility unfolded, if you want to witness how 56,000 men crushed an empire, then hit that like button right now. Show YouTube you're here for real history. And subscribe because this channel is about battles that change the world. Let's continue. Georgia in the year 1121 was a kingdom suffocating under the weight of empire. For decades, the Seljuk Turks had treated Georgian territory like a playground for their raids. Villages burned, people fled, the kingdom paid tribute just to survive. But survival came at a price, and that price was dignity. The Seljuks didn't just want taxes, they wanted submission, complete submission, and they were getting it. To understand why this battle mattered, you need to understand where Georgia sat on the map. Positioned in the South Caucasus, it was a crossroads between Europe and Asia. To the north lived the Kipchak nomads, fierce horsemen who roamed the steppes. To the east were Turkish principalities, small but dangerous. And to the south loomed the Seljuk Empire, a military machine that had swept across Persia and into Anatolia like a tidal wave. Georgia wasn't always this weak. Centuries earlier it had been divided into feudal states and separate kingdoms, but by the 11th century the Bagrationi dynasty unified these territories under one crown. King Bagrat III brought Kartli and Abkhazia together, creating the Kingdom of Georgia. It should have been a golden age. Instead, it became a nightmare. Internal chaos tore the kingdom apart before external enemies could finish the job. Dynastic princes and feudal lords constantly challenged the crown, claiming autonomy and threatening the nation's unity. Civil war erupted in the 1030s when King Bagrat IV's half-brother Demetrius tried to seize the throne. Aristocratic revolts followed in the 1060s and 70s, and while Georgians fought each other, the Seljuks watched and waited. When the Seljuks finally struck, Georgia had no answer. King George II, who ruled from 1072 to 1089, was forced to his knees. He recognized Seljuk domination. He paid tribute to their sultan. He watched as his people were displaced, his economy ruined, and his kingdom reduced to a vassal state. The Orthodox Church, already fractured by the Great Schism, couldn't provide spiritual unity. Corruption spread, hope died, and Georgia seemed destined to disappear from history. Then in 1089, something changed. George II was forced to abdicate and his son took the throne. His name was David. Later, history would call him David the Builder, but in 1089 he inherited a kingdom in shambles, surrounded by stronger neighbours, with no allies and no options. Most rulers would have accepted their fate. David did not. David understood that Georgia couldn't win a traditional war. The Seljuks had more soldiers, more wealth, more experience, so he didn't try to fight them head-on. Instead, he began rebuilding Georgia from the ground up. He instituted military reforms, transforming an army of weak mercenaries and undisciplined peasants into an organised fighting force. He stopped paying tribute to the Seljuks in 1099, taking advantage of the First Crusade's chaos in Syria and Palestine, and he began recapturing Georgian settlements one by one. The Seljuks didn't take this lightly. They tried to crush David at the Battle of Trialeti in 1110. They failed. They tried again at the Battle of Raksi in 1118. They failed again. Each defeat humiliated them. Each victory emboldened David. And by 1121, the Seljuk Sultan Mahmud II had had enough. He declared a holy war against Georgia, but Mahmud didn't lead the army himself. He gave command to someone far more dangerous. Ilghazi ibn Artuk of Mardin, a name that made Christian kingdoms tremble. Ilghazi had just crushed the Crusader Prince Roger of Antioch at the Battle of Ager Sanguinis in 1119, a slaughter so brutal it was called the Field of Blood. His reputation as a champion of Islam and destroyer of Christians was unmatched. If anyone could break David, it was him. Ilghazi didn't come alone. He brought a coalition, his vassal Tugan Arslan, the hunchbacked lord of Ardzin, Bidlis and Devin, the Maziedid Dubays from Al-Hilla, Sultan Togrul, ruler of Aran, the Atabeg Kuntogdi from Nakhichevan, and nomadic Arab tribes eager for plunder. According to the medieval chroniclers Walter the Chancellor and Matthew of Edessa, the coalition numbered 600,000 men. Other sources claimed 400,000. Modern historians estimate between 100,000 and 250,000. Even at the lowest estimate, it was a massive, terrifying force. David knew they were coming. His scouts had been watching the coalition assemble for weeks. He also knew that if they reached Tbilisi and united with the Muslim forces already there, Georgia would be finished. So he made a decision that would define his legacy. He would not wait for them to come to him. He would choose the battlefield. He would set the trap, and he would strike first. But first, he needed an army, and not just any army. He needed soldiers who could match the Seljuks in mobility and ferocity. So David turned north to the Kipchak steppes. The Kipchaks were Turkic nomads, rivals of the Seljuks, and some of the finest horsemen in the world. In 1109, after being defeated by the Rus' Grand Prince Vladimir Monomakh, 40,000 Kipchak families fled south under their Khan Otrok, known in Georgia as Atraka. David welcomed them. He married Otrok's daughter, who was baptized and given the name Gurandukt, and he offered the Kipchaks land, safety, and a place in his kingdom. In return, each Kipchak family provided one soldier. This gave David a standing army of 40,000 men, warriors raised from birth in the saddle, experts with the bow, fast and deadly. Combined with his royal guard, the Manaspa, a force of 5,000 heavily armoured shock cavalry, David now had the core of an army that could challenge anyone. But he wasn't done. David also recruited 500 Alan warriors from the north, fierce mountain fighters, and he brought in Frankish crusaders, about 200 men sent either by King Baldwin II of Jerusalem or as independent mercenaries. These crusaders had fought Ilghazi before and survived. They knew his tactics. They wanted revenge. In total, David assembled 56,000 men. It was still far smaller than the coalition army, but it was fast, disciplined, and ready. In July 1121, the Muslim coalition crossed into Georgian territory. They advanced along multiple routes. Some came through Erzurum and Kars, others marched through Ganja. Tugan Arslan moved from Dvin. They were confident, almost arrogant. Reports reached Ilghazi that the Georgian army was small and retreating. He believed David was afraid. He believed victory was inevitable, and so he marched his massive army deeper into Georgia, heading toward Tbilisi. David watched and waited. He let the Seljuks advance. He let them think they were winning. And then, on August 10th, Ilghazi's army reached the valley of Trialeti and camped near the town of Manglisi, at the foot of Mount Didgori, about 40 kilometers west of Tbilisi. They were tired from the long march through the Caucasus. They were spread out, and they were exactly where David wanted them. The terrain near Didgori was perfect for an ambush. Dense forests, steep slopes, narrow passes, valleys and meadows that looked open but could become death traps. The Seljuks, with their massive numbers, would struggle to maneuver. David's smaller, faster forces would have every advantage. On August 11th, David led his army along the Nishbizi Valley from the ancient capital of Mtskita. He divided his forces into two groups, one under his personal command, the other, smaller and hidden in reserve behind nearby heights, under his son Demetrius I, with orders to strike the enemy flank at a signal. Before heading into battle, David addressed his army. According to Walter the Chancellor, the French knight and historian who recorded the event, David said, "Soldiers of Christ, if we fight bravely for our faith, we will defeat not only the devil's servants, but the devil himself. We will gain the greatest weapon of spiritual warfare when we make a covenant with the Almighty God and vow that we would rather die for his love than escape from the enemy. And if any one of us should wish to retreat, let us take branches and block the entrance to the gorge to prevent this. When the enemy approaches, let us attack fiercely." David ordered the Nishbizi Valley behind his troops to be blockaded with fallen trees. There would be no retreat, no escape. His men would fight to the death or win. There was no third option. The Georgian soldiers accepted this. They trusted David completely, and they prepared for battle. On August 12th, 1121, the Muslim coalition woke to a quiet morning. They expected another day of marching. Instead, they got something else. David launched his attack. But he didn't charge blindly. He used deception. According to the Arab chronicler Ibn al-Athir, David sent a small detachment of 200 Kipchak cavalrymen toward the Seljuk camp. They pretended to be deserters seeking protection. The Muslims, confident and careless, welcomed them. They saw no threat. That was their first mistake. As the Kipchaks approached the Seljuk leaders for negotiations, they suddenly attacked. Arrows flew. Seljuk commanders fell. Chaos erupted. Before the Muslims could react, David ordered a frontal assault. His Frankish crusaders, heavily armoured and mounted, charged straight into the enemy vanguard. The crusaders smashed through the Seljuk archers, who were caught completely off guard. The archers, a crucial part of Ilghazi's strategy, were entangled in close combat and neutralised. Ilghazi and his son-in-law were both severely wounded in the initial attack and were forced to withdraw from the battlefield. The coalition army, massive but now leaderless, began to panic, and that's when David struck from the flanks. His heavy cavalry, hidden behind the ridges, charged down from the western side of the mountain in full formation. King David personally led the Georgian right wing, his Manaspa shock cavalry riding straight into the disorganised Seljuk left flank, which was trying desperately to reinforce the vanguard. The charge was devastating. Moving downhill gave the Georgians even more momentum. Their lances pierced through the Seljuk lines like thunder. Almost simultaneously, Demetrius led the Georgian left wing and struck the Seljuk right flank with his own heavy cavalry. The Seljuks were being crushed from 3 directions, and when the Georgian infantry joined the fight, the Muslim coalition broke. Panic spread like wildfire. Seljuk troops started retreating through the huge gap in their rearguard, which wasn't even engaged in the battle yet. But instead of standing and fighting, the uninvolved troops saw their comrades fleeing and joined the retreat. What started as an organised withdrawal became a massive chaotic rout. Men trampled each other, units dissolved. The valley filled with screams. David didn't let them escape. He sent his Kipchak cavalry forward to chase down the fleeing Seljuks. For 3 days, Georgian cavalry pursued the broken army across the mountains and valleys. They hunted survivors relentlessly, cutting them down, taking prisoners, and ensuring that the coalition could never regroup. According to Georgian chroniclers, the corpses filled up the rivers and covered all valleys and cliffs. The slaughter was total. The battle itself lasted only 3 hours. 3 hours to destroy an army 10 times larger. The Seljuk coalition left behind thousands of dead, thousands more captured, and all their supplies and equipment. Ilghazi, wounded in the head, barely escaped with about 20 of his men. His reputation as an invincible commander was shattered. His army was annihilated, and Georgia was free. The numbers of Seljuks fleeing the field was so large that Georgian cavalry was still taking prisoners days after the battle. King David used these captives strategically, ransoming them for diplomatic leverage and resources to rebuild his kingdom. The entire region was liberated from Muslim influence, and for the first time in decades, Georgia could breathe. But David wasn't finished. In 1122, he laid siege to Tbilisi, the city that had been under Arab Muslim control since 736 CE. After centuries of foreign rule, Tbilisi fell to Georgian forces. David made it his capital, moving the seat of power from Kutaisi. The unification of Georgia was complete, and the Georgian Golden Age began. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a cultural, political, and spiritual rebirth. David, the king who inherited a broken kingdom, had rebuilt it into a power that could challenge empires. The Battle of Didgori became known in Georgian chronicles as the Miraculous Victory, a moment when a small nation refused to die and instead rose to greatness. For the Seljuk Empire, Didgori was a humiliation they never fully recovered from. Their dominance in the Caucasus ended, their reputation as unstoppable conquerors was damaged, and the Crusader states, which had been under pressure from Ilghazi's armies, gained breathing room. The weakening of Ilghazi's forces helped King Baldwin II of Jerusalem and other Crusader leaders survive. For Europe, the news of Didgori spread quickly. Bells rang in cities across the continent. The Pope called David a champion of Christendom. Chronicles marvelled at the victory. A contemporary Georgian chronicler wrote, "What tongue can relate the wonders which our sustaining Christ gave us on that day? And what are the narrations of Homer and Aristotle to me about the Trojan War and the bravery of Achilles, or Josephus's writings about the valour of the Maccabees, or Alexander and Titus at Jerusalem?" The battle entered Georgian national consciousness not just as a victory, but as a defining moment of their identity. Modern Georgians still celebrate Didgori every August 12th with a festival called Didgoroba, the Day of Didgori. In the 90s, the battlefield was decorated with monuments of swords, a reminder of the day when 56,000 Georgians stood against an empire and won. King David IV ruled until 1125, continuing to strengthen Georgia and expand its borders. He preached tolerance of other religions, protected Sufis and Muslim scholars, and abrogated taxes for Muslims and Jews in his kingdom. He was more than a warrior. He was a builder, a statesman, and a visionary. Later, he was canonized as Saint David the Builder. The Battle of Didgori proved something that echoes through history. Numbers don't always win wars. Strategy, terrain, leadership, and the will to fight can overcome overwhelming odds. David chose his battlefield carefully. He used deception, surprise, and the geography of the land to neutralize the enemy's advantage. He built a diverse coalition of Georgians, Kipchaks, Alans, and Crusaders who fought as one, and he led from the front, personally commanding his cavalry in the thick of battle. Ilghazi returned to Mardin in devastation, his army destroyed, his body wounded, his pride shattered. The man who had crushed the Crusaders at the Field of Blood was broken by a Christian king in the mountains of Georgia, and the coalition that was supposed to erase Georgia from the map instead became a warning that empires are not invincible, that small nations can fight back, and that sometimes the underdog wins. August 12th, 1121, a narrow mountain pass near Didgori, 56,000 Georgians facing a coalition of 100,000 to 600,000 Seljuks, 3 hours of battle, 3 days of pursuit, and a miracle that changed history. The king's trap had worked, the empire was crushed, and Georgia was reborn.